Well, it's another Wednesday, and this afternoon, Bank of Ghana is on the radar. Why? Because it continued to make big losses, and that is what we want to analyze and break down for you. Why is the Bank of Ghana still recording losses? What is the bigger picture? If we stretch it back to, let's say, 2008 and do the analysis, how has the trajectory been like, and when will this mammoth losses actually end? And you can see on the smart world that big figure, almost 9.4, let's say somewhere around 9.41 billion Ghana cedis in 2024 fiscal year. That was the loss that was recorded. And you recall that this figure went as high as 60 billion Ghana cedis. On the smart wall is where we do most of the magic. As usual, I'm joined by Winston Taki, and is the Bank of Ghana again on the radar.
The central bank has been phenomenal for quite some time now. We've seen how the performance has been, especially in terms of numbers. Many have been of the view that indeed, why should a central bank, who is supposed to be a regulator, be making such huge losses? But there are very, very technical reasons why they got to where they are at the moment. And also we saw the information released recently last week concerning their financials, and tells you that this is something that has built on over the years. So where we are now, we'll go deeper, break it down for our viewers, maybe possibly in 2023, where the central bank decided not to rather finance government spending, and that was something that has been called for by experts, economists, and even stakeholders in the industry. And this is something that has come to light, but we'll go deeper as to what led to where we are as of now.
Well, what led to this 9.41 billion? This is even an improvement. And Winston, we were actually trying to project whether this year the bank will continue to make losses. And if you look at what transpired in 2024, how it became expensive for the bank to do open market operations, coupled with the exchange rate losses we saw, the cedi depreciation we saw in 2024, it was clear that it was going to be difficult for the central bank to come out of that 10 billion loss it made in 2020. They now restated somewhere around 13 billion Ghana cedis. And many were saying that, look, the bank could actually go down again with a 10 billion loss. But what we are seeing is that that figure is 600 million less, 9.14 billion Ghana cedis. This has been the picture so far. This has not been how Bank of Ghana has been looking like. And many have said that this is a central bank. Why should we even be talking about profitability? Once the Bank of Ghana finds itself in these huge losses, what happens is that it affects its equity position. And it will come to the bank's current equity position and even start talking about the recapitalization and all of that. But this has been the trajectory since redenomination in 2007. We've been tracking this from 2008 to 2023, trying to see how the Bank of Ghana has fared on the tangent of profitability. And you can see that this was a bank that was actually very healthy between 2008 and 2016. You can see, continued losses where it even rose as high as 1.5 billion Ghana cedis in 2012. Then for the first time in 2017, something happened. This was when the bank, remember in 2016, there were conversations around, restructuring of some of the commercial banks and how much that will cost the bailout cost and what they call the financial sector cleanup and all of that. Fast forward to 2017, the bank recorded its first profit in a span of 17 years, 1.6 billion Ghana cedis. That loss actually came down in 2018, where it reduced from the billions into 733 million Ghana cedis. Then we saw, right after the banking sector cleanup, the bank started recovering again. The central bank, 1.8, 1.6, and 1.2 billion. Everybody thought that this was going to be the picture. Yeah, and in fact, we understand that even with the bank's hospital that it built, the bank hospital, that big hospital, one of the best in the country, was actually built as a result of the profit they made over the years. And so that tells you that, look, it may be that the Bank of Ghana is not meant for profitability, but when it makes profit, you can actually put it to good use. And then we saw the outlier. I'll leave that for Winston to analyze. the story of 2022 and 2023 and how we began to record mammoth losses?
In 2021 and 2022 became a quite difficult year for not just the Bank of Ghana, but for the Ghana's economy. We saw we entering the COVID era. Inflation started spiraling to the tune of 54%, and it became quite expensive to manage inflation. So the central bank decided to go into the OMC, that is the open market operation, and most of its activities had to do with controlling the amount of money in circulation. And this improve or increase the expenditure in that angle. Many have also deduced to the fact that there are instances where, if you go through the financials, central bank had to come in when the government decided to go into the domestic debt exchange program to take about 50% of the haircut. Initially, the government promised that there would not be haircut, but I'm sure the confidence and assurance came as a result of looking at Bank of Ghana's position. But the back end of the central bank gave it some kind of optimism, possibly that this haircut may not ripple up and have any subsequent effect on the economy. But we saw that the subsequent years, these particular losses kept moving on, and it became a huge burden, not just on the central bank, but on the economy. We saw most of our delays going to the IMF. We had to meet certain targets, and there has to be constant agenda to try to look good, backed by negative ratings that we experienced.
The downgrades.
So, exactly. We could not get to the international market to make any borrowing, and that became a huge burden for government. Initially, in 2014 or 2012, 2014, government had to ensure most of the capital project had to be financed. There were delayed payment to most of the contractors, and this became a huge burden. Unfortunately for government, there were not much of a labor education during those periods, so government was able to contain most of the tensions in the market. However, the prices of commodities, to bring it down, became a key issue for ordinary Ghanaians. Looking at the price of fuel going up, and all these became an issue of concern and became quite topical during the election period in 2023, coming into 2024. And these were some of the key indicators that possibly came against not just the Bank of Ghana, but against the previous government.
Well, the interesting story, just like you have painted, is in this zone. And if you are watching this, I'm sure you want to know the why. Why is Bank of Ghana actually making losses? In fact, in 2022, 2023, when government found itself in a very tight fiscal situation and was shut out of the international capital market and needed financing, the Bank of Ghana had to step in to borrow to government, and many will literally call printing of money and all of that. In that year, 2022 to 2023 and beyond, what we saw was that as a result of this, the government or the central government debt to the Bank of Ghana rose significantly, where government was owing Bank of Ghana, huge sums of money, billions of, Ghana cedis. And then came our attempt to go to the IMF for a 3 billion bailout package. And the IMF said, look, if you look at your debt situation, you look obolo, or bloated. You become obolo because of your debt situation. So you need to lose.
The debt became obese.
You need to lose weight and make your debt sustainable. The Bank of Ghana had to step in to do that saving. They had to take that bitter pill on behalf of government. And what they did was that during the domestic debt exchange program, the Bank of Ghana had to take huge or mammoth haircuts, in excess of 40 billion Ghana cedis. And as a result of that, coupled with the exchange rate losses and all of that, and the cost of the open market operation, remember that policy rate went beyond 30%, which means it was so expensive for the Bank of Ghana to come into the market to do open market operation to mop up money in the system and to also control inflation. As a result of all of this, we saw the Bank of Ghana for the first time in its history making over 60 billion, then around $6 billion in losses. And this is, it's unprecedented. It has never happened in the history of the Bank of Ghana before, but it's been able to recover, where losses are now hovering around 13 billion, restated in 2023, and now we are talking about some 9.4 billion. But what we've done, for you to understand how far we've come, and in terms of the magnitude of the losses that we are talking about, just take a look at this chart, where in this period under review, in 17 years or after redenomination, if you decide, Winston, to add the total, profit made by the Bank of Ghana from 2008 to 2024, that total profit will give you some 10.74 billion Ghana cedis. And total losses, you can see they are just 5. They can be 5 if you add 2024. As against, 12 years against 5 years, and you have total or cumulative loss of 10.4 and cumulative profit of 10.4 and cumulative loss of 82.79 billion, almost 8 times the profit in the same period under review, Winston.
Any investor, any government that sees these numbers, you tell you that indeed there has been a lot of things that went into it. You remember when we were talking about the losses some years back about the cost of the central bank's building. Basically, we were questioning and we wanted clarification about how much of what are the elements or components of the structure. But that also came to light. If you go forward, also you realize that looking at the financials, the central banks will tell you that they indeed had to engage in a lot of activities that led them to where they are now. But it all boils down to we looking good, getting to equity levels. If you look at the projection, they said by 2027, the central bank's books will look quite better according to projection. But it all begins
2027. Does that look realistic? We'll look at the numbers anyway, yes. But does that look realistic?
It will depend on the current fiscal measures the current governor intends to institute. If you look at the direction of his structure, it tells you that possibly it will take a lot of sacrifices. He's been trying to work from the policy rate perspective while ensuring strong fiscal balances and also capitalization of most of the banks in the financial market. Right now, it appears there has been new policy structures for the banks, and there's been new regulations and directives to ensure not just the local banks, but also the remittance sector is improved. So the central bank is taking both steps, but it will take time for us to say, possibly in the third quarter, for us to insist that all these indicators will lead us to where we are. We've seen inflation coming down marginally in the last rating by the Ghana Statistical Service. Today, we saw the GDP.
The GDP figures.
And it tells you these are good indicators in the medium term. But the medium to long term, how will we sustain and which local, domestic manufacturing, industrialization, which sectors are going to be championing. But one thing that I'm quite impressed about is seeing the agri sector making a loud sound in terms of the outlook
for the first time in a long time.
And if government decides to roll out its basic political related, agri-related projects, and we come to see the ripple effect of that in subsequent years, you must say there's more to be done. However, we can also commend the previous government because they also, the benefits, one will argue that most of the projects instituted by the previous government are what we are experiencing.
Food and jobs.
Oh, yes. And that is quite subjective and argumentative, but that is the reality based on the economy we live in right now.
But it's interesting now that we are talking about a central bank with a negative equity, and there's a figure that you see in terms of the equity position. We've been as high as 55 and 66. This year we are talking about 58 billion Ghana cedis. It simply means that Bank of Ghana's liabilities now exceeds its assets, which means it puts the bank in a negative equity. Well, the conversation now has to do with how does the bank move from continuous losses to maybe profitability or breaking even. You spoke about 2027, and many have said that, look, if you look at the current gains in the exchange rate space, one thing that features heavily whenever Bank of Ghana make losses in their books is that, well, as a result of forex losses, exchange rate, fluctuations, all of that affecting the Bank of Ghana position. But this year, the story looks different, where we've seen the cedi move from as high as 15 cedi 50 pesos to now, let's say 11 cedi 20 pesos, or just like the president would say, that the true value of the cedi is between 10 cedis and 12 cedis. That is a very good insulation or cover for the Bank of Ghana to look at the numbers and say, then we see some relief ahead in 2026 and 2027, where if we are really able to solve this aspect, and looking at even the restructuring terms that they even went with governments where they probably may not be facing huge losses, or the magnitude of the the impact they got from the DDP may be taking a nosedive from 2026 and 2027. You may possibly see a central bank that is returning from huge losses to maybe breaking even to profits, especially looking at it on a tangent of the new policies where gold board, for instance, is bringing in billions and millions of dollars into the country almost every time to stabilize the city. What that means is that the bank's story in 2025, when they actually put out their report in terms of the foreign exchange losses and all of that, might be different. The magnitude or the impact may be different or lesser compared to, let's say, 2024 and other years. This, for me, looks positive for Bank of Ghana, where it looks like if they are able to sustain the appreciation of the city, or try and create some fence around the city where you gain stability, the story might look different when maybe we see the 2025 report of the central bank.
Let's not be surprised, or let's take it in good faith. When things were happening badly, we kept hearing from the previous finance minister and the previous central bank governor that it was as a result of the Russian-Ukraine war. This time around, due to Trump's bad decision, we can see things have looked good for the economy. So external factors are something that play a key role in the outlook of our economy. One thing that we have to be quite cautious is how connected are we externally as against our shock absorbers domestically. If we look at our economy, it's been quite consistent that if our reserves becomes weak, we struggle. If our forex reserve become weak, we struggle. If our gold reserve become weak, we struggle. We will come to a point where we discuss the gold for oil policy, which was a key concern if you look at the financials of the Bank of Ghana, how deep-rooted it was. But many have raised concern about the opacity of that particular policy, although many have also questioned its implementation. The objective of the gold for oil policy were quite open, that it will reduce fair prices, it will improve utility prices, it will probably reduce fuel prices at the pump and inflation on all its related activities, and that was what was projected. If you go down, if you look at the extent of the implementation from the precious mineral mining company, marketing company, to the bulk distributors, all of them came as key element. But as to how we can sync these particular issues into perspective, we'll come back to how also it affected the central bank, which is reported losses due to operational expenses that came to light.
Well, touching on gold for oil, the Bank of Ghana says that they actually injected more than 4 billion into that program. They've lost a significant component of that. They say that if you look at the total amount lost is about 2 billion, Ghana cedis, right? 2.1 or so. And that's about 45% of the amount injected into the program. But many will say, well, you may have lost 2 billion, but that program may have brought fuel prices down. And then also, it actually brought, forex stability. Where
between 13 to 14 Ghana cedis per barrel, but how long was that sustained is the key question.
Exactly, and many have said that sustainability and maybe how international forces actually made it difficult to actually even sustain it. But some will also argue that right after the implementation of the gold for oil program, fuel prices actually fell. The dollar, the city stabilized and all of that, but maybe it didn't sustain. And we saw fluctuations in the markets and all of that, but definitely because of demand and supply factors. But moving away from that, the bank says that it cannot even continue with the gold for oil program anymore because of the financial burdens attached to it. This is because this is a bank that is struggling with a 58.6 billion Ghana cedis negative, equity. And the conversation is, we have seen that going into 2025 and 2026 and 2027, the bank's, books may look good because of the current gains we are getting from the city. The IMF program will be ending. We may be getting a full picture of the benefits, and the central bank will be in the mix. And again, the central bank is still doing 0% financing, which means that it's not going into any form of agreement with government to incur losses and all of that. It means it's sticking with its core mandate of targeting inflation and keeping the cedi in a stable manner. Many have said that if you look at all of these factors, then it means that going forward from 2026 onwards, the Bank of Ghana may start recording profits again. Or even if it does record losses, it could be in the millions very soon. But the question is, how does the bank even recover from a negative position of 58.6? Many have, made, in terms of talks around recapitalization and all of that. We understand there were some, in terms of the options available on the table, where government, the Bank of Ghana actually requests about 53 billion Ghana cedis in bailout. Winston, the finance minister says that, look, we cannot finance the whole thing through budgetary allocation. And the options given, it looks very difficult for the Bank of Ghana to go for either of them. Where should the Bank of Ghana go, and how should they even recapitalize?
It is now time for the central bank to go back to its core mandate, to ensuring that the central bank itself is the banker of the government, the bank of the government. And
in fact, the lender of last resort.
Exactly. And the government has a lot of state-owned enterprises under operation. And most of these state-owned enterprises over the years, if you look at the report annually, most of them have left an undeserved level, negative equity levels, most of them due to mismanagement. If you look at the corporate governance structure, for instance, look at ECG, which if you look at the potential of ECG, as a technocrat, you could tell that it has the tendency to generate enough revenue. But due to the corporate governance structure, which they've said has improved for quite some time now, if you look at the technical losses we've done consistently on this program, it tells you that it hasn't gotten to where it's supposed to be, and there's a lot of work to be done. If you look at Cocoa Board, its old structure, now that the gold board has come to light, key eye is going to be on it because it's taking the role of PPMC, and that is going to be a key conversation. But where the central bank will get money will depend on the kind of financial advice that they will have to give to government, especially how those books are managed. Now the central bank has to go down to ensure there's due diligence in the bookkeeping structure and the management of most of these state-owned enterprises, so that at least when they are making profit, there will be enough capitalization for the central bank itself. Although the banks also have their own position, many people were quite skeptical in terms of what investment component could they invest in. I get across a lot of time, should I invest in mutual funds? Should I invest in Bank of Ghana Treasury Bill? And this became quite a disturbing phenomenon just after the domestic debt exchange, where many people, especially pensioners, had their investment affected. And you could see the sentiment when they were hitting the street years back. But if you look at where the central bank is heading, there is going to be a lot of decision. Many of them may not be comfortable, but the central bank is quite positive that the bank's financial outlook will improve over the years. But it all will take a lot of strong will. And the loophole, which I was quite pleased during the last monetary policy meeting by the governor, was that the remittances space is going to be one big elephant they tend to ride. In
fact, it looks like Bank of Ghana is now relying on two things, the Gold Board initiative, remittances, and then also strengthening corporate governance, especially with the new reforms they've introduced in the commercial bank space. But the question is, let's look at the options that were available to the government in terms of the central bank in terms of recapitalization. We've spoken about this before, but with the current negative loss or negative equity, we believe that it's now time to bring back the options back to the table and say, can governments, find a way to come to the aid of the central bank? Because when government found itself in trouble in 2022 and 2023, it was the Bank of Ghana that bailed it out.
I said a prayer of the government, and that was a very interesting one. We saw a lot of, not just the IEA, we saw ESA also coming to front, warning the government or warning the central bank that let's put a limit on borrowing to the central bank, to the central government. The limit was a key conversation, and management of our debt became another key issue. Already we saw how the inflation, the cedi depreciation affected the outlook of our debt, which increased almost about 4% consistently over a period of time. And so where the rescue will come from, who will save the savior? This is the key question now, because we can't go to the side.
That's an interesting question now. I mean, who will save the savior? Especially when the savior is going back to somebody it saved some years ago. And the first option, definitely was that if we can do this recapitalization or bailout through budgetary allocations, we don't mind if governments can locate to the Bank of Ghana some 5 billion Ghana cedis almost every month. But government says, me, myself, I'm even struggling with a headache where I now need additional 5.7 billion Ghana cedis to buy fuel for thermal plants and all of that. The second option was the transfer of assets. We looked at this option and we said that the bank is already in a negative equity. How does it transfer assets to bail itself out? And then also there was a third option of suspension of its profits over a period of time. Still in losses, now in excess of 9.4 billion Ghana cedis. At what point does it make profit to even start talking about suspension of these profits? And the last option was the use of any buffers generated in the program. In the program here, we mean the IMF program, which will end next year. And in fact, these are the options available on the table for Bank of Ghana. And you, made mention of the 2027 targets and say that looking at what is happening now, it could be that the bank will find itself in the proper position in terms of profitability by 2027. But here are the options on the table in terms of recapitalization. It looks like the first option would have been the best for them. But government says that, Jack, means to minjo.
Government. This song by...
Who is government?
The government said, I'm mad at you and I. So definitely, we're looking at these numbers and telling you the outlook of how the central bank will position itself subsequently in the rest of the year. And these numbers speak to projections just to make you see the real picture of where we are. We're sure the central bank governor is making the right decisions and meeting the key stakeholders. Last week, he met with the CEOs of some of these state-owned enterprises, and I'm sure the outlook by also the cocoa board based on the new price, and that may come up very soon. So yeah, here and there, that decision management here, the corruption should not be taken out of the picture, especially from the government's perspective. Let's hope that these numbers reflect we get to a point of profitability. As a country, you and I, that is where we look for.
Yeah, but Winston, for now, Bank of Ghana is banging its hopes on a gold board initiative as well as remittances. And if you're asking the question, when will these losses stop? We simply do not have an answer, but the projection is that by 2027, things may start looking better. This has been Beyond the Numbers with me, Akufo-Addo, and I always do this with...
My name is Winston Haki. Thanks for watching. Meet us same time here at 5:30 p.m. on Friday. Have a good business day. Bye-bye.